The red and green lorries were everywhere. Kids collected stickers, fans tracked them. Eddie Stobart was British transport royalty. Then in 2019, it all collapsed. An accounting error. £200 million in debt. The company nearly died. But the real story started decades earlier. This is how a family empire destroyed itself, with greed and expansion gone wrong. The early years, Eddie Stobart started small. In the late 1940s, he began with an agricultural business in Cumbria, delivering fertiliser and agricultural materials to farms. By the 1960s, he had moved into haulage. His son Edward took over in 1973 at just 19 years old. Edward inherited a small operation with just a handful of vehicles. He transformed it into something iconic. Edward made the business legendary through obsession with detail. He painted every lorry in post office red and Brunswick green with yellow lettering. This wasn't just colour, it was identity. He created a policy that every driver had to wave at the public when signalled. Every driver wore a shirt and tie while driving. He named every single vehicle with a female name. Twinkletoes, Steady Eddie. Each truck had its own identity and personality. People called themselves Eddie Spotters and tracked the lorries across the country. They would note down registration numbers. They collected photographs. By the 1980s, the company had a formal fan club. It was no longer just a business. It was a cultural phenomenon that people cared about emotionally. Edward Stobart ran the company with obsessive attention to detail. He personally washed trucks even when he owned 26 vehicles in 1985. The company was spotless. Equipment was maintained immaculately. The brand was trusted because it was reliably good. Every driver wore uniforms. Every vehicle looked the same. Consistency was everything. By the 1990s, Eddie Stobart had become a household name. The company expanded steadily. It won major contracts with Tesco, Coca-Cola and Amazon. It had a Channel 5 documentary created about the company. The fan club grew to 25,000 members. Everything looked perfect from the outside. The empire seemed unstoppable. The shift in strategy. But in 2004, Edward Stobart made a decision that changed everything. He sold the company to his brother William and a business partner named Andrew Tinkler. The sale price was kept quiet. Edward was moving on. He was no longer the founder's son running the family business. He was just a man who had sold something valuable. After building the company for 28 years, he was gone from the business. He would never return. The sale in 2004 changed everything. William and Andrew Tinkler now controlled Eddie Stobart. The business still ran well. Customers still trusted the brand. Drivers still waved at the public. But the thinking had changed fundamentally. Instead of running a family business, they were now running an asset. The company was no longer about tradition or pride. It was about value extraction. In 2007, William and Andrew made their next move. They took the company public. They listed Stobart Group on the stock market through a reverse takeover of a property company called Westbury Property Fund. The company that had built its reputation on stability and family values was now answerable to shareholders. It had to grow. It had to show profits. It had to increase its stock price every quarter. The pressure was relentless. The path to collapse. The next move was critical and would prove disastrous. In March 2014, Stobart Group made a decision that would define the company's future trajectory. They sold the original haulage and distribution business to a private equity firm called DBay Advisors. The sale price was £280 million. DBay got a 49% stake in what was now called Eddie Stobart Logistics. William Stobart and Andrew Tinkler remained involved, but control had shifted. DBay was now the main shareholder in the haulage business. For DBay Advisors, this was a brilliant investment. They owned one of Britain's most iconic brands, with 25,000 fans, and major contracts with household names. They owned a profitable business with a strong reputation. Within months, DBay made more than £150 million in profit from this investment alone. They had essentially bought a money machine But DBay didn't stop at just owning a profitable haulage company. They wanted more. They wanted growth. They wanted expansion. They wanted to build an empire. After going public in 2017, Stobart Group became obsessed with diversification. But this diversification wasn't in the trucking business. It was in the parent company. Stobart Group owned Edward Stobart Logistics, the trucks. But Stobart Group itself was buying other things. It invested in biomass plants. It bought regional airports and ran them. It spread itself across industries it didn't understand. The logic was simple on paper. Growth meant more profit. More profit meant higher share prices. Higher share prices meant successful executives. Executives got bonuses based on share price growth. But this strategy had nothing to do with the trucking business. Edward Stobart Logistics, the haulage company, was still profitable. It was still winning contracts. It was still operating successfully. The problem was different. Edward Stobart Logistics was being squeezed by debt. In 2014, DBay Advisors had bought a 49% stake in Edward Stobart Logistics for £281 million. By December 2019, DBay increased its stake to 51%. The company had taken on massive borrowing to pay for this acquisition. It owed £200 million to banks. KBC, Allied Irish Bank, Bank of Ireland, and BNP Paribas had loaned serious money. The banks were getting nervous. The trucking business was profitable. The haulage operations were sound. But the debt was crushing. By 2019, Edward Stobart Logistics had losses exceeding £12 million in the first half alone. The company needed cash immediately. Without fresh money, Edward Stobart Logistics would collapse into administration. That would mean bankruptcy. That would mean job losses for thousands of drivers. The situation was critical. In July 2019, the house of cards started to collapse. An accounting error was discovered, a massive one. The company had incorrectly accounted for lease arrangements. A £2 million adjustment was needed. This wasn't just a minor accounting mistake. It revealed much bigger problems hiding underneath. The full picture was catastrophic. The pre-tax loss for 2019 was approximately £239 million. This included major impairments and write-downs. The company had been hiding terrible financial performance under layers of accounting techniques. On August 2019, trading in Edward Stobart Logistics shares was suspended. The company couldn't explain the accounting error clearly. Investors panicked. Media outlets reported that the company had hidden financial problems. The board removed CEO Alex Lafay, but removing one CEO couldn't fix the problem. The damage was done. Investors had lost confidence. The brand that had been built on trust and reliability had broken that trust spectacularly. The losses in the first half of 2019 were catastrophic, more than £12 million. But that wasn't the real problem. The company disclosed that it had £200 million in debt. It had no clear way to pay it back. The full scope of the loss was £239 million, with major impairments. The company needed cash immediately. Without fresh money, Edward Stobart Logistics would collapse into administration. That would mean bankruptcy. That would mean job losses. That would mean the end of the empire. The rescue deal. Banks gave the company a deadline. Get your finances in order or we will pull the plug. The company had 1 year to fix itself, but 1 year wasn't realistic. By November 2019, Stobart Group reported losses of £20.9 million. The company was bleeding money. Administration was coming. Deloitte was brought in to prepare for insolvency. If no rescue deal happened, the company would be bankrupt by Christmas. Then DBay Advisors returned. They had made enormous profit from Edward Stobart already, but they wanted more. They offered a rescue deal. They would inject £55 million directly into the company. In return, they would get a 51% stake. This meant DBay would be the majority owner. William Stobart would lose control. The family involvement would end, but there was a catch. DBay didn't charge normal interest rates. They charged 18% per year on the loan. The Unite Union called it bandit capitalism. The company was essentially paying protection money to stay alive. DBay had negotiated a deal where they would profit enormously whether the company survived or failed. The The shareholders voted to accept the deal in December 2019. They had no choice. It was rescue or bankruptcy. By 2020, Edward Stobart Logistics was stabilising. The immediate crisis had passed. The rescue money from DBay was keeping the company operational, but the company was still deeply in debt. It was still losing money. The story wasn't over. It was just entering a new chapter that nobody wanted to see. In July 2021, Kalina Group purchased Edward Stobart Logistics from DBay Advisors. Kalina is a large European logistics company with operations across the continent. Kalina is itself a subsidiary of the German dairy company Müller. This meant Edward Stobart Logistics, the proudly British icon that had represented British excellence and quality for decades, was now owned by a German corporation. The British Empire had been sold to Europe, but Kalina kept the name. The red and green lorries continued. The trucks still rolled with pride. In September 2021, Kalina rebranded the parent company side, but the trucking operation kept the Edward Stobart name and livery. The female names continued. The wave policy continued. Drivers still wore shirts and ties. Kalina understood that the Edward Stobart brand still had power. The spotters still tracked the lorries. The culture remained. The trucks survived, the final irony. Edward Stobart, the man who built all of this from a small agricultural business, never saw any of this happen. He had died in March 2011 of a heart attack at just 56 years old. He had sold his shares in 2004 when he sold the company to his brother, William and Andrew Tinkler. By 2010, Edward had petitioned for personal bankruptcy, owing £220,000 in personal debts. He was no longer involved with the company when it later collapsed. His personal financial failure was separate from what happened to the business years later. He died as a bankrupt businessman, disconnected from the empire he had built. But there is an ultimate irony to this story. Stobart Group, the parent company that diversified into biomass plants and airports, eventually collapsed. In 2024, Stobart Group went into administration. The non-trucking side of the empire was gone, but Edward Stobart Logistics, the trucking business, survived. The trucks outlived the empire. The haulage company that Edward had built in the 1970s continued under Kalina ownership. The red and green lorries continued rolling down British roads. The spotters continued tracking them. The female names continued. The wave policy continued. The thing Edward actually built survived. The thing that destroyed itself with greed and diversification failed. The Edward Stobart story is about more than one company's failure. It's about what happens when family business becomes investment opportunity. It's about what happens when brands become assets to be exploited. Edward Stobart created something special. He built a company that people cared about. People collected stickers of his lorries. Kids wanted to grow up driving Edward Stobart trucks. But once private equity got involved, everything changed. Growth became the only measure of success. Profit became the only goal. The company started making decisions that didn't make sense for the business. It borrowed money to buy things it didn't need. It chased expansion instead of excellence. It forgot that a brand is built on trust, not on balance sheet size. Today, the Edward Stobart trucks continue rolling under Kalina ownership. The spotters still track them. The drivers still wave. But Stobart Group itself, the parent company that pursued growth and diversification, is gone. In 2024, it went into administration. The truck survived. The empire did not. Edward built something that lasted longer than the greed that nearly killed it.